Today's podcast is all about sharing recovery stories and is presented to you by myself, that's Rachel, hello, Andrea.
That's me, hello.
And Holly.
Hello everyone.
And we're all peer support workers who work within the Wellbeing Service. Today's podcast will cover what are peer support workers, what are recovery stories, and we'll be sharing peer support workers' lived experiences of recovery stories. We hope that you come away from today's podcast with an understanding of what recovery stories are and how they can help in our own recovery journeys. So just to tell you about peer support work, peer support workers all have their own experience of living with mental health challenges, and we share our experience of this with others, along with our recovery stories to offer hope. We use our experience of recovery to help people make sense of what they're going through and to explore what may support them in their own recovery. So I'm going to ask this question out to Holly and Andrea. What is a recovery story? Holly, do you want to start us off?
Yep. So a recovery story is sharing someone's own lived experiences of dealing with mental health challenges.
It's also a way to know that you're not alone in how you're feeling.
It's a way of knowing that other people have got through similar experiences to give the hope that you can too.
And it's a way of sharing the ups and downs of going through recovery.
And what we did, we kind of asked the other peer support workers within the service of their own experiences of using recovery stories. So in terms of me, hearing recovery stories made me realise that I wasn't on my own or weird for feeling the way that I did, because I did feel a bit weird and I did feel a bit alone and kind of lost and stuck. And they helped me to realise that other people have gone through similar experiences and come through the other side, and that with support I could do so too. Then nearly 4 years ago now, I became a peer support worker myself, so my kind of story's gone full circle in terms of sort of hearing recovery stories, and now I'm using my own recovery story to help people to do the same thing as I did. Andrea, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so mine's not dissimilar from yours actually, Rachel. So, I thought that I was the only one in the world struggling to get through each day. But when I heard recovery stories, I realised that other people felt the way I did and I wasn't alone. They gave me hope that things could get better and at some point I'd start enjoying my life again. And they gave me some ideas about what might help and how I could look after myself better. And actually, I'll never forget what a difference someone sharing their story with me made.
Yeah. And it kind of makes you, like I said, makes you feel less alone, like you found your tribe. People actually understand you or are getting you, kind of.
Yeah.
We can't ever say we know exactly how someone else feels or what they're been through, but we can actually, use our stories to make that connection. And it was also interesting when we were sort of thinking about this. There's also the power of using our own recovery stories to help us to reflect on our journey. So I know that, when I'm sharing my story with somebody, I can actually take that point to stop and pause and look back and go, goodness me, haven't I changed? Haven't I grown since those first very difficult times? And actually, like we said, it's a powerful thing to listen to, it's a powerful thing to share, but actually listening to our own story and sort of reflecting back on that is equally as powerful, isn't it? So what we'd like to do really with today's podcast is to think about sharing a recovery story. So like I say, I've got Andrea and Holly with me for today's broadcast, and we're going to be sort of thinking about sharing a recovery story. And Andrea and Holly have been sort of very kind to say that we can talk about your stories today, so thank you for that. So Holly, if it's all right, I'd like to start with you. And would you be able to sort of tell us what was happening for you when oh no, I didn't mean Holly. I've got myself in a muddle already, dearie me. All the best laid plans of mice and men. Let's go to Andrea. I do apologise,
okay.
Andrea. There's you already, and I've just wandered off elsewhere. Sorry, Andrea. So Andrea, what was happening for you when things became difficult?
Okay, well, when things were the worst for me, I was married and I had a 3-year-old son, and I found myself in the situation where I was the breadwinner. So going out to work in an office, 40-hour week, I think what happened was I put a lot of pressure on myself, financially, and being a perfect parent, being a perfect wife. And I think everything just got too much. And one day I got into work after having typed letters for like 10 years and picked up the phone and made loads of phone calls. I just absolutely broke down, and I couldn't get my brain and my hands to coordinate. So yeah, that was what the most difficult time for me.
Okay, thank you. And Holly, sort of thinking
Yeah.
about, Andrew sort of started us off at that first point in in a
Mm.
recovery story. Is obviously the difficult part. What would you say was your lowest point in your recovery story?
I think for me, one particular time comes to mind, and it was I was still living at home with my mum and my stepdad, and we'd gone out. We'd gone over to visit my aunt and uncle, and we came back from there, and I stepped into my bedroom and went to lay on my bed, and then out the blue, before I knew it, I was in the middle of this massive panic attack, which was certainly by far the worst that I'd ever had, and to the point where I was convinced that I was going to die. It was that terrifying, and it was a panic attack that seemed to go on for hours, actually. And I think for me, what happened at that point was that everything that had happened previous to that point had come to a head. So I had gone through months and years of not only struggling with my mental health, with my depression and anxiety, but I also have mild cerebral palsy. So I'd gone through several months and years of trying to navigate myself through school, through college, and through work and relationships, and all that stuff, and all that bad stuff that had happened had suddenly come to a head at this point, and was kind of translating itself in this big panic attack, which was absolutely terrifying for me at the time. But it was almost that point where suddenly it became aware that for all this time I'd been coping, but at that point suddenly I wasn't coping anymore, and something had to change, had to happen. And so yeah, for me that was a big moment, and a very frightening moment as well.
Thanks, Holly. And it's kind of interesting, like, your story with Andrew is different, but actually kind of quite similar. Like she was saying, juggling work and commitments and family responsibilities, all of these things sort of piling up. And then, like you say, for yourself, you were dealing with a lot of sort of difficult things over a period of time. And we do get to that, oh yes, all right, I'm carrying on, it's all right, yeah, I'm tolerating this, it's okay.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, with in my story, my lowest point is very similar to yours, Holly. My brain and body were both going, cooey, Rachel, you're not quite well. Pay attention. I'm giving you headaches. I'm giving you psoriasis. I'm making you unwell. You don't want to eat. You don't want to sleep. And it was like, oh, just carry on, because that's what I do. And then, my lowest point was a very soggy mess at that point of break is the best way to describe it, I think, for me. And it was like, okay, this is the point that I'm at. This is where where in a sense where I needed to be. Which kind of leads me on to my next sort of question, Andrea. What were the turning points or turning point for you in terms of your own recovery story?
Okay, well, I've had several over the years, but I think the one that stands out the most is that after I'd had the bit of a meltdown at work, the natural progression from that was for my husband to come and get me, book a doctor's appointment, and me go to see my GP. And it was that moment where I walked into his office just sobbing, didn't know what was going on, was so confused, and he just said to me, Andrea, it's okay, I know what's happening. You've got depression. I'd say it's a clinical depression, but I can help you and we can work through this and things will be okay. And I know there's no normal, but it was kind of like, you're reacting in a normal way to everything that's been going on for you. So I suppose the first turning point was acknowledgement, and that it was okay, and some information really about what was happening.
And I think it's interesting, isn't it? From that lowest point, we can have a turning point. So actually, they can be one and the same thing, which feels a bit weird. You're like, well, hang on, I'm in a soggy mess. I'm having a big panic attack, or I've come back from work and I'm not functioning. How can that also be a turning point? But actually, for me, it was, you're not well. You're not well. You've been doing all this for such a long time. You need to stop. And it's the same as you, Andrew, sort of heading to my GP and having a big old sob on him as well. But and like you say, the GP's like, no, this is actually a usual reaction to depression, to anxiety, to the things that you're going through. And yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Those low points, those difficult points in our lives can actually be those points where we sort of take a real big turn and pivot and start going on our own recovery journey. So thank you. Yes. So in terms of those early days, Holly, what worked for you?
For me, actually, in those really early days, what really helped me was my music, particularly listening to my favourite music. So I spent a lot of my days in those early times listening to a lot of Guns N' Roses. That might sound like a bit of a strange option.
Not at all, Holly.
But I think one of the things that attracted me to that particular music is how raw it was and how honest it was, and it really reflected how I was feeling at that point. A lot of Queen as well. So through doing that, through listening to that music, I sort of slowly but surely started to rediscover myself almost through that, and through, I mean, music and all performing arts has played a massive part of my recovery and continues to. I think particularly at that point, it was a really important tool for me to kind of navigate my way through this incredibly dark and difficult time that I was going through, and it led eventually to me over time kind of really rediscovering my passions and interests, particularly in the performing arts. And I ended up joining a local rock choir. It just really reignited over time my passion and my love for the performing arts, which has played such a crucial part in my recovery and me staying well. So yeah, in those early days, it was a lot of kind of sitting in my bedroom listening to a lot of intense music, I'd say.
But Holly, I'm guessing that also helped you to make those sort of gentle connections back to yourself, because I know for me, I felt completely disconnected from who I was, what I did, from life, and it was, like you say, it's not like an instant, I'm going to put the Guns N' Roses on and magically feel better, it'd be fabulous if that could happen. But it's also, like you say, it's those gentle things that we do, those slow things that we do. It's like, okay, I just need to lie down, but actually today I'm going to be lying down and I'm going to be listening to the music that I previously enjoyed, and actually
absolutely
might be able to listen to it for 30 seconds and then go, oh goodness me, that's too much. But it's like you say, it's how we kind of build up. And
that's right.
Probably if it's okay, I'll sort of stick with you for the next question, if that's all right. So in terms of those early days, you're listening to your Guns N' Roses and your Queen and sort of gently sort of easing sort of back into things. How do you look after yourself now? Has much changed, or doing
I think for me it's continuing to do all those things that I learned in the early days, and to be honest, a lot of those things involve lots of very small things together. So it's still listening to my music, it's making myself my favorite drink, it's and I mean coffee and tea, not alcohol, but you know.
No judgment, Holly.
Yes, we worried there, Holly.
Occasionally maybe, but yeah, and particularly throughout this period of lockdowns and the pandemic, it's certainly about making sure that I'm got a balance between being inside but getting outside as well, has been incredibly important and continues to be, because I do believe that, I think that, you know, luckily I was lucky enough to have an outdoor space throughout this period, and that proved incredibly important and will continue to. So that for me is a big thing as well, is trying to get just out into nature as much as I can. It's, of course, we're all spending a lot of time indoors at the moment, and for me that balance is really important. But ultimately also just continuing those things that help me to stay true to myself. So yeah, that the music, trying to kind of continue with performing arts. Of course, that's a little bit difficult at the moment, but yeah, all those little tiny things that make up who I am, I think.
And it's those things that, like you say, they may well be tiny. So, like, you know, I know how much music sort of means to you and all of that, but when you kind of put them together, they actually make a huge difference in what we're doing. And like you say, you know, those things that we did in the early days doesn't mean that we've kind of abandoned them now.
No.
Go, it's kind of actually, you know, using them less or using them differently, or response to them is sort of different. You know, in my early days I couldn't read, and reading is a massive thing for me, and it was very distressing not to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But actually further down those days, you know, when I'm starting to feel a little bit more human, a little bit better, then I can actually put the reading in, even if it's only sort of 10 minutes that I could manage, because my concentration was then disappeared. But yeah, now massive part of looking after myself is the ability to disappear into a book and relax like that. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it, those things that we need to do at those different points in sort of recovery and how they work. And Andrea, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, there was actually. Thinking as I'm listening to you and thinking about it, now I actually do everything that I didn't do back then when I first got my depression. So especially good work-home life balance, because back then I had none. Everything was about work. And and like Holly was saying, it's very difficult because I know we're all working from home at the moment. But just, you know, finishing work at 5 o'clock, not doing overtime, not just switching the laptop on, or, you know, because I used to go to work at weekends as well, listening to my body, you know, so if I become a bit stressed or I'm really tired, you know, doing what my body wants me to, so getting an early night. If I haven't got if my sleep's being affected, I've not got a very good sleep routine, thinking about how I can get that back in place, not skipping meals like I used to. And really importantly is filling my time with positive things. Like Holly said, things I enjoy, things that mean something to me. And being around the people that make me feel good, the people that give me something like I give them. Yeah, because friendship's a two-way street, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's really interesting listening to you there, Andrea, because like previously we talked about how our own recovery story can help us to reflect in our recovery, and it's perhaps something, you know, when we're thinking about recovery stories, we don't actually think about so much. You know, we're like, oh, I've had this person speak, but actually our own story is really powerful. Like you said, you know, that when things became difficult, you know, everything was sort of work based, and like you say, work-life balance wasn't there, and you know, all of those different things. And it's interesting to see how, you know, that was a really difficult time, a really low point, but like we said previously, a turning point as well, because you know, you've gone from that one place to actually to where you are now, and your own story has actually taught you so much. You know, like you say, when we're going back down those old habits. We're like, oh, hang on, I'm doing that again. I'm opening my laptop at the weekend. Should I be doing that?
No. No, you shouldn't.
But yes, it's how we learn from ourselves as well, isn't it? It's really quite an interesting thing. We can learn from the stories of others, but also from ourselves. So I'm going to throw you guys in the deep end here. So going on from that, learning from like our own story and the things like that, what did you learn from going through the experience? And I only want one word.
Okay.
I know, sorry, I've really thrown you in it here. Right, so for me it would be resilience. So going through all of those things that I went through, I learned that actually I am a resilient little person. So I know it's a bit mean asking for one word. Andrea, have you got one?
I have, but it's a hyphenated one.
I'll let you have it then.
Okay. Self-compassion. So I remember a time when I beat myself up so badly for not being the perfect mum, not being able to get, I don't know, however many letters out each day. But now it's just, I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be. And I can only do what I can do, and I'm all right as I am. So yeah, self-compassion for me, definitely.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. What about you, Holly? Have you got one word, or if you're struggling with one word, I might let you have a phrase, a phrase or a sentence that can sum that up.
I've been trying to think of one as you've been talking. I think for me, it ultimately is just about staying true to myself. I think that's what I'd have to say. Yeah, sorry, I tried with the one word.
That's okay. It's tricky though, isn't it? Because our recovery stories, they could be years long, couldn't they? All the things that we've gone through and all of that. To sum it up in one word is actually really quite mean of me. So thank you guys for not going. I'm not doing that. But yeah, like you say, staying true to yourself, throughout everything. And you've kind of touched upon it as well, haven't you, Holly? In this current strange world that we're living in, and all the different things that we're having to cope with, it's actually good to know that you're staying true to yourself and the things that support you. And Andrea, it's great to hear how much you've learned from your own recovery story as well, and how self-compassion is now your buzzword as opposed to how it was when things were really, really difficult for you. So thanks guys for sharing those stories with me today. It was really sort of appreciated, and really kind of enjoyed listening to the things that how you've changed and developed through time. So that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So bringing it all together for today's podcast, we've kind of looked at briefly what are recovery stories. We've shared some peer support worker lived experience of recovery stories and our own. And our next podcast will be looking at reading and recovery.
Okay, and if you'd like any more information on recovery stories, you can find that in today's podcast notes.
And if you're sort of listening to this today and you think that you'd like to refer yourself to the Wellbeing Service, you can self-refer, so you don't need to go to your GP or have an appointment, anything like that. You can do so by looking at the website, or you can use the telephone and call us. And if you're listening to this as and thinking that peer support is something that you'd like to have, and you're currently having treatment within the Wellbeing Service, then please do speak to your therapist who can make the referral for you. So I'd just like to say thanks loads to Holly and Andrea for joining me for today's podcast, and thank you for listening, and hopefully you'll be able to join us again for our next podcast, which will be on reading and recovery. So I'll say goodbye from me. Goodbye.
And I'll also say goodbye, and thank you so much for tuning in and listening to what we've had to say. And I really hope that what you've heard helps.
Yeah, and for me, goodbye everyone. Thank you so much for listening to us, and I hope you have found it helpful as well.
Yeah. Okay, so another goodbye, and hopefully you'll tune in again to our next podcast. Thanks. Bye.